Hey there. So today we're going to be continuing our Make a Match 3 game similar to Candy Crush using GameMaker Studio 2. So I'm going to open up GameMaker Studio 2 here and we'll take a look at where we were last time and how we can move forward. Last time we had made it so that the board was just getting filled up. So what we're going to do today is we're going to add dots to that, and then we're going to, after we add the dots, talk about how we can tell where they are in relation to space, and then next time we'll talk about moving them. So just to remind you again, if I hit play here on my project, it's going to think and compile for a second, and then here we go. Ta-da! There's our grid. It's however many wide we want it to be, however many tall we wanted it to be. So now, the next thing I want to make over here is make sure that, yep, I have my dot sprite in. So I'm going to go over to my objects. I'm going to right click, choose create object. I'm going to call this O_dot. And in my dot object, I'm going to add the dot sprites. Even though this contains all 8 sprites, I'm only adding it as one sprite to this object, and you'll see why in just a second. I'm going to go over here to the events, and I'm going to add a create event. And in this create event, what I want to do, I know I manually set the image speed in the dot itself, but I'm going to set it again anyway. So I'm going to initialize some variables, and then, oh, this needs to have description next to it in order to actually work. Okay, I'm going to initialize some variables, and then I'm going to use those variables to show you why it's going to generate random like it should. So my variables first are going to be image_speed equals 0 and image_index equals. Now I want this to be randomly chosen from all the dots. If we take a look at our dot sprite here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different dot sprites. So I'm going to go back to my dot object, and I'm going to make this a random number up to but not including 8. So I random 8. I means it's an integer value, and it's going to choose a value between 0 and up to 8, but not including 8. Okay, I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back to my game manager object here, and in my create event, where I'm creating these background tiles, I'm also going to create, so I'm just going to kind of copy this line here since I'm using pretty much the whole thing. So copy and paste. And the only difference I'm going to do is that instead of creating a background tile, I'm going to create O_dot. So I'll save this really quickly and then hit play. We'll take a look at how this affects what we've been creating. Okay. Oh, and here's the problem. So the dots are being created, and the problem is we haven't set their depth. So let's go back to our dot object, and inside my create variables, I'm going to add an extra line. I'm going to say depth equals -y. And this is going to make it appear in front of those backgrounds. I'm used to hitting Command-Shift-S to save stuff. Alright, I'm going to save this and hit run. So let's take a look at this now. Okay. And there we go. So we've got our grid populated by all of these dots. If you'll notice that we already have matches of 3 in a lot of different places, so we're going to want to fix that. Probably also want to make my dots not 32 by 32. I probably want to scale them down a bit. So let's deal with that right now. I'm going to go to my dot sprite here, and I want to resize it. So I want to scale the image down to be 16 by 16, and I will apply that. Okay, now if I hit play, let's see how that changes stuff. If I have to scale it back up, it's going to look fuzzy, but we'll try this right now as it is. Yeah, it's better. It kind of has an interesting look to it. Alright, anyway, so let's move on to some other stuff. So what we want is we want each of the dots to know what row, and rows go left to right, and what column they are, because that's going to define what their x and y position in the world is. So let's take a look at that. Let's go back to our dot object here, and also in the create event, I'm going to add some more variables. I'm going to create a variable for, let's say, row, and a variable for column. Now, to set the row, let's actually talk a little bit about the math behind this, because believe it or not, it has to do with linear equations. Something that I'm sure you never believed your teacher when they told you that. It's something that gets used in real life. So when we're setting up our grid, we're actually going to need to know exactly where every dot is as far as rows and columns go, because that's what we're going to be basing the entire game on. So taking a look at how our grid is set up here. If we have a dot here, 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 I'm just going to draw in a few rows here so I can kind of illustrate what's going on. So when you create the first dot, you go down first and then over. So this is the dot that's in the 0, 0 position. This is the dot that's in the 0 column, but row 1, and then 0 column, row 2, and so on. So it's kind of, if you imagine an XY axis flipped over and then upside down, it's kind of like we're looking at the fourth quadrant here. So, but each of these other dots are placed 32 away from where the first dot was. And the first dot was placed at the X start and Y start positions that we defined in the game manager. So if we want to find out what their row and column should be, and we know what their X and Y positions are, then we kind of have to solve a linear equation backwards. So, for example, the X position was equal to the X start plus 32 times whichever column it was. And when we made those double for loops, the column was really I. So if we want to solve for which column it is, then we have to do this backwards. So we're going to take our current X position minus the X start position, and that would be equal to 32 times the column. And then if we divide by 32, we get that the column it's in is equal to X minus X start, all divided by 32. Similar for the Y. For the Y, the row, that's going to be equal to the current Y position minus the Y start position, all divided by 32. Okay, so let's take a look at that in the actual game now. Alright, so back in GameMaker Studio here, when I'm setting up my row, I'm going to use that formula I just created, where I'm taking its current X position minus the X start position from the game manager. And I'm just going to hard code this. It's not a great idea to do that, but I'm going to look anyway. My X start position is 26, so I'm going to say X minus 26, and then I'm going to divide this by, I'm going to create a new variable up here, and I'm going to call this the width of the tile that this is occupying. I'm going to divide this by 32. So that's the row. And then I'm going to do something, set the width equal to 32. And then down here, I can have at least one less number that's hard-coded. Call that width. Okay. Now, for my column, I'm going to do something similar. I'm going to do Y minus the Y start from the game manager, which is 144. So Y minus 144. And then I'm dividing this by the width as well. So now each dot is going to know what their row and column are. And to prove this, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go and I'm going to add a new event, and this is going to be a draw event, and just a plain old draw. So my description for this is I want to display the row and column of the dot. So first, I'm going to do draw underscore self, because whenever you do a draw event, you have to make sure that it's drawing itself. Next, the way a draw event works is anything that's lower in the code gets drawn on top of anything that's higher in the code. I'm going to draw some text. Draw text. And the text I want to draw, I have to give it an x and y position. I'm going to do x, y. And then I'll do, let's see, I'll do row first. And then I'll do draw, if I cannot spell that correctly, draw underscore text. And I want to do this at x, y minus, let's say, 10. And rows again. Okay, so I'm going to save that and then hit play. And we'll take a look and see what that displays for us. Okay, so as you can see, okay, so we displayed the row first and then the column above that. So this is row 0. Looks like it's reversed. Huh. No, it's not. Oh, ha! Because I had to do row again. Jeez. Column. Alright. So let me X out of this, save it, and then hit play again. That was silly. Okay. There we go. So this is row 0, column 0, row 0, column 1. I'm just doing this to make sure that it knows exactly where stuff is. And because these are indexed variables, because I use them from the for loop, they start at 0 and go up to 9, even though I've got 10 across. And here they start at 0 and go up to 13, even though it's 14 high. So it looks like it's wrong, but it actually is just fine. So row and then column. Okay, cool. So we've created the dots and we've created a kind of a row and column system. I'm just going to comment these out because I don't need them at the moment. I will need them later. Row and column system to keep everything kind of structured. We could use a data structure called a grid, and we might end up doing that in the future, but for now we're going to keep without the grid. Alright, so thank you very much. If you learned anything, feel free to add a like. Have a great day.